Hello, my name is Christine Perret. Welcome to the AR for Enterprise webinar on the subject of the IEEE standard called the AR Learning Experience Model. It's my pleasure to host today's webinar. We'll have several speakers. I want to just remind everybody that attendees are in listen-only mode. You can use the question section of your GoToWebinar control panel to type in any questions you may have for our speakers and panelists. In the last portion of this webinar, we will have question answer. So be thinking of important questions you would like us to discuss. During today's webinar, I'll start with just a few comments about the area. Then we will have a presentation by Jennifer Rogers, setting the stage and the context for how the standard, the IEEE ARLEM specification, can be valuable in your enterprise. And then after Jennifer, Dr. Fridolin Wild will present the standard itself, the motivations and how it's designed, sort of the life cycle as well, and how you can begin using ARLEM in your organizations. Next, Rob Christie will be presenting how, as a tool provider, Next Tech AR Solutions will implement the ARLEM specification. Then a panel discussion, as I said. So that's our agenda. I just want to remind you that the AR for Enterprise Alliance is an industry organization focusing on the ecosystem of enterprise AR. We think of our large enterprise entities, the customers, as being the top of a pyramid. Those are the organizations that really need to implement augmented reality to improve performance, operations, reduce risk, and so forth. And they're at different stages in their evolution, in their implementation of augmented reality. They're being supported by two other ecosystem segments that the area includes in our landscape. One is the providers of enabling technologies, as well as end user technologies. They develop services and software and hardware that the enterprises can then implement. And then the non-commercial entities, which includes a wide range of different groups, universities, research institutes. We also have some standards bodies that are members of this consortium. And together, these constitute this ecosystem that is accelerating the adoption of augmented reality. So that's, we have several different programs. We provide thought leadership to that ecosystem. We also support networking and interactions within the community to develop partnerships and share insights. We like to think that we are also helping to close the skills gap to reduce the difficulty that people have, companies have, when trying to hire professionals to work in this domain. And then we have our variety of committees that focus on different barriers to adoption, and those committees work in specific domains. I chair the research committee, and I also support the Interoperability and Standards program. This webinar focuses on a specific standard, and that's what we have here today. So that's the introduction, the orientation, if you will. And I'd like to now invite Jennifer Rogers to set the stage for why interoperability is important, why AR is important in organizations.
Thanks, Christine. It's really an honor and a pleasure, privilege to be here today, and just really excited to speak to you all with regards to the potential that exists around this standard, because it has the potential to do amazing things for our industry, for people and for the world at large. And so I'll spend a few minutes just talking about some of the potential that we do see with regards to implementation of these types of standards. And I typically will start this by kind of introducing the idea of accelerating people potential in an era of change. We essentially are looking to the future and to the present and the ways in which we can really reach all of our colleagues, whether they be in our organizations, in our communities, or beyond, in the ways in which really propel them forward. And that's really a big part of who I am and what my mission is. I've had the privilege of working throughout my career, mainly with high risk and high compliance industries, and looking at the ways that we really can create and cultivate that vibrant ecosystem culture that Christine started out talking about, that really captivates and catapults our workforce forward. And so some of the things I'll share with you today are some of my thoughts with regards to where we are and where we can be as we look to the future and the ways in which we envision a new possibility for our organizations and the people within them. So I'll start just briefly by talking a little bit about change. The title of this presentation is In an Era of Change, so it's important to talk about change from a few different lenses. This first lens is really our changing world, and I don't know that I need to spend a lot of time emphasizing the point that our world is changing in the current environment. We're all experiencing some pretty dramatic change at the moment, but it's really important to think about this and think about the ways that it will impact us in the next decade. What you see on the screen is actually some great work that's been done, and it really is just kind of summarizing some mega trends that are predicted in our world between 2020 and 2030. Some of those you will already see coming to play, and it's important for us to think about the context of this and how this really gives us the opportunity to look at things in a different way going forward. But some of the mega trends that you would probably already be familiar with: shifting economic power, so emerging markets, developing economies, very important. Climate change, resource scarcity. What is that doing for us, and how are we organized in a way in which we can really address that challenge head on? Technological breakthrough, rapid advancement of technology, which we'll talk a little bit about in our session today, and the ways in which that impacts all of us and the ways in which we can harness that. Demographics, social change, obviously a big part, and rapid urbanization. These are all changes that are predicted or already part of our world, and it's important for us to think about the fact that things are changing, and they're changing very rapidly, and we need to think differently. In addition to our changing world, our changing work is a big piece that we have to think about as well. And I won't spend a lot of time on this, but this image really is some great work that was done by McKinsey that really is talking about sector skill shifts, primarily in energy and mining by the year 2030. And what we see is really less time by our colleagues spent on physical and manual skills and basic cognitive skills, and an increase in higher cognitive skills, social and emotional skills, and technological skills. So we've got to reach our workforce, and we've got to reach them in very different ways and engage them to do different skills as we go forward. Additionally, our workforce is definitely changing. And that comes from mindset shifts in terms of ongoing and continuous learning in the workplace, new jobs being created that are different than the ones that have existed before, as well as our gig economy and contingent workers and their roles within our organization. This also impacts organizational structures and really gets us to a more dynamic way of thinking about our organization and the ways in which we develop it, as well as C-suite changes that are needed to drive that change. And there's really just 3 quick points that I'll walk you through in this presentation that really kind of focus on the parts of this standard and the ways in which it really helps us to deal with this era of change. We'll talk briefly about the reduction in variation in processes in our equipment, in our operational processes, and also talk about recognizing diversity in people and the ways in which those 2 things intersect to really reimagine the workplace in significant ways. So When we talk about reduction and variation, what we're really looking at is standards. So this is a great conversation that we're having today, whereby we look at processes, equipment, and parameters and make them accessible. And accessible is really the key word here, because what we really want to ensure is that we're making those standards available to people, acknowledging that people work in different ways, they have different educational backgrounds, some work with their hands, some work in an office setting. How are we actually dealing with that variation and acknowledging that we can't make all of these things available for people in the same way? So you'll hear more about this in this presentation, but definitely the ways in which we think about how we organize our work, how we reach people in the flow of work, and how we actually differentiate that experience so that our colleagues can access it and drive operational excellence, as well as the tracking of that behavior through the data that tells us whether we're on track, which comes through XAPI. So a couple pieces around this that I think are interesting to talk about and just illustrate for you. I'll go through them pretty quickly. When we think about the ways of working, we're rapidly in an age in which if there's one static competency model within an organization, we've pretty much missed the mark, right? What the most progressive organizations are doing at this point are really defining the work rather than the org structure, and doing scenario planning against the ways in which the organization might need to pivot now and in the future, as well as the capability or skills that are required in different scenarios in the workforce to execute on the organizational strategy. There's great advancements that have happened here with regards to the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning to help organizations build those insights. And it's important because it's really critical as we talk about the connected worker that we can actually engage people in the ways in which they need to be engaged and developing the skills that they might need ahead of change. Once we've got that view in place, we really want to make sure that we're making those multimodal, multi-channel experiences available to people. And what you see on the screen is a very simplistic view, but essentially what we're saying is, in order to be dynamic and in order to really deal with this change, we need to make all modalities available to people from one source. So not building standard operating procedures in Microsoft Office and then building an AR experience in Unity, or building on equipment or contextualized help in another tool. We actually need to single source this from one experience in an open source so that it can be accessible for all. Single-sourced augmented reality is one part of this equation, and we'll talk more about this in terms of how it works with the standard, but really making sure, once again, we're single-sourcing that standard operating procedure into an AR environment versus kind of building or baking content into an AR platform. And then simultaneously getting the data out of that really gives us an idea as to how we're moving forward. XAPI is the data that we're looking for, and I won't go into great detail. I think a lot of the people in the audience already understand what this is, but when we think about it, what we're really looking for is the data or the behaviors that are telling us that the workforce is shifting. XAPI is perfect, and it is an open standard. It gives us the opportunity to see a lot of things. The people that are in our operational contexts, what they're doing, what object they're acting upon, so what equipment they're operating at a particular time, and then what the results and context of that are. So practical example, if I'm in a mining environment, let's say in a processing environment, and there's an operational parameter that goes out of, it's trending out of limits, how do you reach me and tell me that I need to get remote assistance, or to turn a valve, or to change a particular parameter in software to get to a different outcome? These are the things that we're looking to see. Lots of great work already happening here, and an example in the slide of really using that XAPI data in XR to really measure the behaviors that people are performing in an operational context. So in this case, our good friend Ross is closing a mud gun mud hatch, once again in a processing environment, but really gives us the idea of what those behaviors are and how they're shifting and moving. And then furthermore, another example from operational equipment, in this case, a colleague applying a service brake and an accelerator simultaneously. These are the behaviors that we want to see to make sure that we're actually tracking. And then once we can do that, we can recognize the diversity in our workforce and actually meet people where they're at. really looking at their profiles and making them available to them at their point of need. So once again, lots going on with AI and human validation, where we can actually rapidly build capability profiles and actually make them dynamic so that they're constantly changing in our workforce over time. Incorporating that into our continuous feedback cycles in the flow of work to really build really robust profiles for people that allow us to recruit, to accelerate onboarding, to really focus on performance and real-time capability development that then lead us to strategic workforce planning around the scenarios that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation. And once we can do that, once we've recognized the diversity so that we can personalize the experience and identified the standards in which we can make them accessible for all, we can truly reinvent the workplace. And that's why I'm so excited about the work that's being done and the presentation that's coming. What we really want to do is be able to take that evolving equipment, evolving processes, and evolving people and bring those together in a way in which we can see what happens. I won't spend too much time on the slide that you see here, but really the teal parts are the pieces to focus on. If we've got capability in place and content in place in a standardized way, then we can actually personalize the experience. We can look at the capability profile of a person as well as the IoT inputs that come from the operational context and personalize an experience through augmented reality that then actually changes the behavior of the person and resolves the operational context, which gives us the data to show that we've closed the loop by the change in that behavior. One more practical example that I'll leave you with before we kind of transition to the great speakers to come really speaks to the ways in which this IoT data can be used as anticipatory learning. AR is perfect for this because we have our colleagues in the flow of work, doing work with their hands, and we can actually signal to them that there's a piece of information or a decision to be taken that that's needed at the point of time, so in real time. The sweet spot of this, and this is where ARLEM is so great, is where we can actually take operational data, once again showing us that things are trending out of limits perhaps, and combine that with a personal capability profile of an individual to actually deliver through AR a personalized intervention or experience, whether that's an SOP, schematic, remote operations assistance, whatever they need, that really resolves the operational context. It changes the parameters through the behavior of that person, and their behavior is that XAPI statement that we're tracking. So much potential that exists within this space, and it's really just so exciting to be at the point in which we're starting to introduce this standard to others, because it will make a huge difference to our industries and to the people within them, as well as the world at large. Thank you very much. Christine, handing it back to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's perfect. Yeah, I think, you know, it's really, really important to have that context and to see the breadth and depth of impact that these tools and that different forms of communication can have. And it's a lot with those principles and that background in mind that we've been working on the standard for augmented reality learning experience models. Fridolin, would you please take it from here and share it with us, the foundations?
Sure. Well, some people were musing what the 1589 stands for. That's not the year in which we started. However, we have been working on this for quite a while. 2015, in that year, we have launched the actual working group. People were already predicting some of the changes that we have just seen in Jennifer's presentation. And we were looking for an answer to the problem of the skills shift and the changes that we're anticipating in society. And hey ho, we're there. Since April now, formally as well, the ARLEM standard is actually a standard that helps to simplify authoring of AR content. I'll come to that in a minute, but it's a content format that helps people collect from existing data sources the stuff that is needed to create meaningful experiences to others. It reduces, in particular, and that's what we built it for, the need to have specialized tools and specialized content allowing also for reuse of existing content, repurposing of it. It is built to support data integration and interoperability. By having such a normative data model, it can make your applications future-proof. And through the link with the sister standard XAPI in the IEEE, it allows for tracking and reporting of AR activities and reacting to that and accordingly in the adaptation of the sequences. Data integration, I think, is something that is worth pausing briefly. We know that a lot of data that is relevant to learning how to do stuff in a workplace is already out there. For example, in computer-aided design, you would find 3D models and animations from the product design. In a learning management system, you might already find existing learning material that describes how people should get into a new area that they're not yet very performant at. Learning analytics are already out there, like Learning Locker, for example, a famous learning record store implementation. Technical documentation has been around for a while and can be used, but lacks the capability to be executed in the real world. Similarly, a lot is known about the talent available in at least larger enterprises through the use of human capital management suites like SAP SuccessFactors or talent management software. So in that situation where we're basically facing a data mesh, if it's a modern approach, or a data lake, if it's still a modern approach, or a data warehouse, if it's a classic, we're facing the situation that a lot of the data required to execute instruction in the real world is already out there and needs to be aggregated in views using pipeline approaches that possibly are even distributed. And ideally, we do that on the web so that retrieval and storage and versioning and so on is all just happening on the web. So that's what ARLEM is built for. And now, finally, I unveil for you what ARLEM actually is. ARLEM consists of two parts. It consists of a modeling language for activities, kind of a real-world executable workflow language. And it consists of the missing bit that none of these existing workflow languages that you would find out there for ages cover at the moment. It consists of a workplace modeling language that allows to bind these activities to the real world and to other virtual experiences that may be relevant in any such activity situation. So in a nutshell, the activity modeling language deals with how to interact with the real and virtual, and the workplace model and content description deals with which elements are featured, be they real or virtual. If we look a bit more closely, then we can see that the activity description language consists of a container model. An activity will contain one or many actions. Each action consists possibly out of a human readable instruction, the stuff you would put onto a task card telling people what to do, but also then the augmentations, I would say, that are executed when we enter this action step or when we exit this action step. So it can be used to activate particular augmentations, such as a visual overlay, an audio file to be played, a 3D animation to be interacted with, or additional new forms that become possible. It can, of course, then also deactivate them, send messages from user to user or device to device, and through the use of if rules, create a bit more sophisticated branching between action steps. Triggers then move from enter to exit loop. In the workplace modeling language, we would find a description of the tangibles, the things, persons, locations that matter in a workplace, as well as the configurables, so to say, more software-oriented things like apps that are available, apps or widgets or devices you can interact with or sensors you can talk to. In between these and the described standard augmentations, you would find an inventory of markers, image targets, and world anchors, allowing to locate things in the real world, as well as then a description of the standard augmentations available, such as the primitives supported in a specific workplace, primitives being on the level of image or video, but also then more reusable predicates and warning signs. That may be confusing. Let me explain that here at an example. We have in this example here 3 action steps: action step 1, action step 2, action step 3. Each of these action steps, as already indicated, has an enter loop and an exit loop. The activate statement of the enter, for example, might come up with, let's bring a image onto the display of the user and additionally play an audio file. So these would be 2 different types of primitives, which then the audio file may disappear at the end of the action step, while the image is retained in the next one and only disappears in the 3rd action step. Similarly, in the enter loop of the 2nd action step, we might launch a new type of augmentation, an additional 3D animation explaining something that is displayed in parallel to the image, but disappears when the exit loop is entered. The state change is done by triggers, and the standard foresees at the moment 4 types of triggers. A click trigger, that's kind of ticking off on the list of action steps on the task card, the action step as being performed. A voice trigger, you could imagine saying next to move on to the next action step, or sender and detect triggers. Sender triggers then being specific values or thresholds of values that are coming from an Internet of Things enabled device, or detect triggers being then something that the computer vision system tracks either through the use of markers, image targets, or through the use of world anchors and the spatial mapping engine provided by the device on which it is enacted. Additionally, XAPI logging allows to automatically generate from the activity description meaningful semantics-oriented logging of learner activity, of the user experiencing the sequence. A word about branching. Branching has simple launch support through the exit and enter loop of each action step, so it is possible to launch additional action steps or remove them from there. But it is also possible through the use of if rules to react to the XAPI logging, as we have seen here in this slide already. So it is possible to, for example, query whether a user has already performed something or performed something enough times to be counted as good enough. An example of what this looks like. This is from a test.
Watch your step while performing the task.
At Altec, a ExoMars simulator. This is a Mars rover on the ground on Earth, but it's a good example for a maintenance operation.
Okay. First, find the control panel. Then activate rover brakes by removing the red key from the control panel.
Next.
Okay. Visually inspect the solar panels and verify that they are undamaged, no scratches or holes.
Show sensors.
Yeah. Error detected in Module 2. Activity changed to Module 2 error repair.
Next.
Place the box on top of any wheel. Then open the life support box by inserting the key to the lock and rotating the key clockwise.
Next.
Done. Reset Module 2 by first turning the power toggle down and then long pressing the big red button. Check the environment sensors from the sensors panel. Temperature value should now be returning back to green state. We can now close and lock the life support box.
Next.
Yeah. Life support box module 2 is now fixed. Next we will resume to the main activity.
Next.
Okay. Retrieve and pick up the battery charger device box located on the front side of the rover.
Next.
Yeah. Identify the rover red battery charge connector on the left side of the rover.
Next.
Connect the battery charger device to the rover battery connector.
Next.
Yeah. Push the mode button on the battery charger device to start the charging process.
So let's unravel that a little bit, what we have just seen. We have seen quite a range of different mechanisms that are part of the standard, of the ARLEM standard. For example, we have seen in action how a system of different action steps taking place in different locations is enacted, starting off with a reference location for each activity and using a calibration marker then to update all relative locations to that. We have seen also the use of image targets in here that are used alternatively where no relative locations are available. This helps in the video to guide the trainee to the right location. For example, using the interactive glyph pointing towards a specific end of the rover in combination with the task card and the speech output that is read to the user, indicating where you need to be and where you need to go. You can also see a little bit here in the background a nice implementation aspect, the possibility to connect floor lines to the location where the action is, although that is not mandatory in the standard, that is just a good implementation. You have seen several types of augmentations in use, classic stuff like video augmentations or image annotations, and you have also seen then sensor communication and intervention here simulated with the use of a mobile phone that over a local Wi-Fi would be talking to the smart glasses worn by the trainee, taking a fold in the astronaut suit that then requires branching off into a different activity that can be directly loaded over the web or preloaded as a download using a zip and manifest. You have seen also adaptation and later on in that branched off sequence where the astronaut uses the life support module and fixes the fault, and then the values returning again to default and the activity returning to the originally started activity. And you have also seen an insight into a sort of visual language with glyphs developed indicating handling and movement that is part of the core of ARLEM. Here, from a technical point of view, we move now slightly further and look at the kind of instructional point of view. And here we can see a plethora of new instructional designs models emerging. There are a couple of interesting publications out there where you find pointer to deeper work. Message being, however, that ARLEM is very versatile and can support very different types of instructional design methods. In the video, you have seen various of them, like directed focus, the highlighting of objects, the enrichment of objects, formative feedback, and probably several more here on the list. It allows you to build a rich inventory of instructional design methods and support them with the according content. What can you do to further support the uptake of ARLEM and further help to make it the industry standard for expressing augmented reality experience content? We recommend and are at the moment working on a further elaboration of system architecture that you might want to use in your own work. We recommend a layered architecture for the moment that consists of an app layer, a service layer, and a data layer. And from left to right, you would see kind of the activity support, on the right, then the logging support. Interesting units in here are certainly on the repository side, the possibility to maintain repositories for the content, which allows you to execute the same content then in different app bindings on different devices. You could, for example, cater at the same time for smart glasses while catering for mobile phones, while catering for desktop. And that becomes possible through one repository and then adaptations that take care of different rendering. The Learning Record Store allows you to integrate the augmented reality learning content execution with the rest of your content management system landscape. You can integrate, for example, with data traces left behind by the users of your virtual learning environment or learning management system and the like. It allows you also to hook up in the future with cloud solutions for storing room models like you would find in Microsoft's Azure cloud, or with recognition repositories for computer vision such as you find in the Vuforia cloud. And it has a connectivity to message brokers like you might be already using for supporting the rest of your Internet of Things landscape in the enterprise. This recommended architecture as we currently see it, mind it, this is not standardized yet, is also the basis for the open source implementation of Mirage XR, the reference implementation of the standard, which we are going to release in September 2020. ARLEM has just become a standard in April, but there are examples already out there. There's a good description of the standard available from the IEEE Standards Association, and there are others in the field, in the community, that you can ask for advice if you're considering implementing ARLEM into your own products. There are quite a variety of open source products around, Mirage XR being one of them, but here are some others that allow you to get deeper into the implementation, like, for example, when you need to build a web-based authoring tool. To summarize, what does ARLEM help you with? ARLEM helps you with authoring of learning experiences, or in the broader sense, augmented reality experiences, without any specific tools and skills. It is a data format with according models behind that allow you to express and feed the content to existing players. It allows you to do this cross-platform. You're not tied into a specific platform. You can adapt this to run on any device that supports augmented reality. It integrates with sensors. It is a fully matching executable augmented reality workflow language. It allows you to embed instructional feedback as well. It allows you to personalize. It allows you to interact with the Experience API and take care of that in the writing of actual activities. And it can be validated, it can be checked for errors, so that you can support, update, modify, reuse ARLEM content without two licenses or skills.
Thank you, Fridolin. Yeah, very interesting. I believe we're going to have some more questions to get into the different aspects that you've spoken about so far. Thank you for your presentation. Now I'd like to turn it over to Rob Christie. Rob, are you with us?
I am. Thank you,
Could
Christine.
you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your company and your plans?
Sure thing, sure thing. My name is Rob Christie, and I work with an AR product and service company called Nextech AR Solutions. And we have product and services that cross several different areas in AR, one being online web distributed AR, both from capturing content, creating 3D models from real world things, to product visualization on e-commerce websites. We also have AR and 3D advertising networks set up and the technology to support that, so appless AR advertising. And we do virtual events that are enhanced by AR. So not entire virtual events in the AR space, but virtual events platform that we have allows us to enhance virtual events using AR. The fourth area is learning and training. So we have an AR university, which is a kind of an open app that we have. We've developed tools around building AR experience content into this university, and the university app is simply a display mechanism. So both honored to be a part of this presentation and excited to sort of explain our motivations for implementing the ARLEM spec and what we expect to sort of see as an outcome and how it affects our little world over here at Nextech. Okay, so first our reasons for adopting this spec, and the first that comes to mind being, a commercial entity is our customers. They are now motivated. So whereas about a year and a half ago, we spent a lot of our marketing budgets on training human beings on what AR actually was and how it differentiated from VR and what XR was, the modern prospect and customer knows what they want and is going into the field with more of the information from communities such as AREA and ARLEM, expecting to get something that they can reuse. So similar to the SCORM model for learning, there's an expectation that learning content can be reusable and can be interoperable at some point, so that iterative changes aren't going to be extremely costly or built within a silo. From a business perspective, we definitely, part of our plans to implement involve removing those barriers to entry for our customers. Being able to provide something that has a wider community that our customers can leverage content from and leverage learnings from. We do believe that this is the next generation of technology for learning, or at least a major component of it. And we definitely want to be, early on the adoption to be a first mover and build some of those platform tools and authoring tools that can really help the community and further the growth of a standard and a community of standard. We definitely want to build awareness of the long-term value of AR from a learning perspective, from an industry perspective, marketing perspective, so many different perspectives. But we want to build that idea that there's long-term value here, and especially when you consider adopting a standard, that long-term value is accelerated by iteration, not being extremely costly or having barriers to it. We also wanted to achieve validation in the industry, and this community of experts and thought leaders is an excellent place to cut our teeth, so to speak, and also to build some of that validation as an adopter. And lastly, is to participate in this community. As our knowledge grows and the gap minimizes, we can also give back and help out from a thought leadership perspective in the community and help further the standard and the value behind it, and the message. So the value for us is this community, the people in this presentation, the people outside of this presentation, the work that everyone's done, the open source tools, validators, plugins, browser components, anything that anyone has done, any way that anyone in the community has helped, all forms one remarkable body of knowledge that is useful in leveraging when performing an implementation. And we plan to add to that as we work through the various challenges and have various successes. And another value is for our customers, is easing that adoption of AR in their learning mix, so to speak, and speaking to some of Jennifer's ideas of single sourcing that data and single sourcing some of the cross data. So taking existing ideas and activities and some of the data behind that and converting easily to AR has a remarkable value as well. And of course, removing propriety. A lot of what we've done to date as a company has been proprietary, and the ability to break down some of those lines, knowing that that is one of the barriers for access from a customer or prospect perspective, being able to break that down and having a valid sort of community to rely on to say, yes, that is broken down now. It has great value to us. And cost accessibility. When we're in an environment where we're building against a standard that has interoperability, and we're able to iterate quickly and efficiently from a cost perspective, and that's a cost perspective that's a gain to our customer and not necessarily to us. I wanted to talk next about a bit of our proposed journey. We're kind of at the beginning, so I'd say we're closer to this first ball on the timeline. We've sort of agreed to invest the resources in adopting the standard, and we've got our developers ramping up on the documentation and taking a look at tools and things like that, developing some plans to do an implementation. We have already several tools that we use to create AR content, and we want to take a look at next enhancing those tools, our authoring environment, to basically interpret and read-write valid activity ML and workplace ML, so that the outputs will be prepared or ready for integration. The next perceived step in the process will be to adapt a player. So we're kind of getting geared up to find some content to start testing with that. And then the next step would be, officially testing using some of our past clients' work, scenario-based training in AR, using our authoring tools through our player, just to validate that we've got it right. That will be an interesting point in the history. And then, of course, enhancing the rest of our stack through to the platform, so that we have an end-to-end solution from generating content straight through to playing and distribution. Sorry, my mouse stopped working momentarily. Our expected outcome from this journey, and I'd say overall and above all, is knowledge, is being a part of this community, adding to and benefiting from the knowledge that exists, and keeping that knowledge going. But we do expect challenges. So thankfully, there is a community we can rely on to help us through some of the gaps in the spec, and some of the gaps more so in our interpretation of the spec as we go. So I feel confident that we'll be supported through every step of that. There's going to be technological challenges as we go. I'm certain that at points we'll have to stop completely and start again. Our plan of making modifications on top of our existing authoring environment may not be successful. We may need to start again and build from the ground up. In that case, we're completely happy with that. We just need to get to that step to see what happens there. But we're looking forward to making those iterations and reporting along the way. And the last challenge we expect to come up against is time. We all face the same challenge of time. We're a business, so definitely time, squaring away the time to do the right testing and to push the ball forward in our timeline will be a challenge, but it will be well worth it when we consider the knowledge that we're adding to and the value that we're going to get, both ourselves as a business and our customers, from adopting this standard and realizing truly interoperable AR content. I think that's a huge value to us.
Thank you, Rob. That's a great way to end it, to end your comments and the prepared remarks. Yeah, thank you to all three presenters for setting the stage for this now panel discussion. Before we go forward, since you've already been introduced to Jennifer, Fridolin, and Rob, I'd like to take this opportunity to ask Brant if you would introduce yourself and explain why you're here.
Yeah, I'm Brant Darg. I'm a senior learning scientist. Sorry, I just changed jobs. Was a learning scientist, but now I'm learning engineer, senior learning engineer at Boeing. And my technical fellowship, I'm also an associate technical fellow at Boeing, and it's in a dual one in virtual environments for learning, as well as adaptive instruction for learning and personalizing. I guess one of the things that seems to be a recurring nightmare that we have in industry is tool proprietary content for learning, and I can just mention, one product that stirs up probably emotions in a lot of people of Flash, and so I can talk about that now or after the introductions.
I'd like for Avron to introduce himself, and we'll come back to you, Brant. And I'm probably going to let this, if you don't have any conflicts, run a little bit over the hour so we have plenty of time for these important questions and topics. Avron?
Hi, everybody. Avron Barr. I'm long time involved with standards at the IEEE, and also I've been a consultant for the Department of Defense for a decade and a half about the infrastructure needed to support advanced distributed learning. This is one of the most exciting technologies that come forward now, but you all know that there's a lot of technologies coming into the training and education space, and standards, as we get more and more different kinds of products doing different things, standards are going to be critical for our happiness in the future.
That's a great place to transition to the first question. I'd like to kind of put this to Avron, Fridolin, and Rob, which is, okay, Avron, in your experience with IEEE specifications in the past, if you're going to support a company that's implementing a brand new standard like this one, is there a certification program or method? Is there a plan for a certification platform for ARLEM?
There are discussions, and Fridolin may know the current status better than I, but just generally over the IEEE. The IEEE, of course, has been involved in helping markets certify their products conform to standards. Often they do that in cooperation with an industry association. There's some revenue opportunities involved in certification of products. So very often the IEEE and an industry association that's specifically focused on that technology would cooperate to do that.
Great, thanks for that insight. Yeah.
Yeah, to add here, so it is something that we are discussing in the working group, but we have not pulled it off yet. that still
Mm-hmm.
takes a bit longer time. And I think the first steps that we're undertaking towards that is to put the mechanisms in place that we can actually get there more easily than currently. And a significant step for that is the validator that we are currently developing with a developer.
Okay, yeah, validator is the first step before certification. I understand. Well, this question kind of goes to Brant and Jennifer. Jennifer, you started to, well, you in a way you really did already answer this question, but it's around organizations having a requirement or specifying to their vendors that they have to support one standard. How does that work? And why would an organization such as the Boeing company or Jennifer, companies you've been, why would they do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, you hit the nail on the head, Christine. You know, in my previous organizations, I've worked really hard to actually build that ecosystem of providers that have an understanding of true enterprise solutions. And so to answer your question, what's needed? Really what's needed is the right partnership with the right providers that are really committed to open standards around content, open standards around data, and really not locking organizations into a proprietary file format that that just doesn't work across the landscape. And what does that do for organizations? Well, it does a lot. If you look at the current situation that we're in now with the pandemic, I'm seeing a lot of organizations that are struggling to pivot. And when I say that, what I mean is they can't take the ways in which they've enabled or trained their workforce before and make them available in this new environment, because what they built before was built in a very specific deliverable format that does not translate to anything else. So for example, it was built in a PowerPoint presentation or in Articulate, or, you know, a rapid authoring tool. It doesn't, not to pick on Articulate, but any one of those tools that then is locked into that file format and cannot be at XR, AR, VR. It can't be deployed in any other way. The strength for organizations here is that it gives the control of your intellectual property back to the organization, so that the organization can update that, can maintain it, can make sure that it aligns to the strategy and that it deploys to everybody in the way in which they need to access it, and brings back all the data from all of the ways that we're reaching people back into that learning record store within the organization to form organizational insights that really you know, make up your organizational strategy. So it's really important from an organizational perspective, because that's your IP, right? I mean, this information is what should drive your organization, and it should not be in a format that's kind of locked in a box that you don't own as a company.
Right. Brant, do you have some experiences? You started to speak about this, and I think I'd love it if you came back and expanded. Oh, Brant, I don't hear you. Have you muted yourself? Brant? Okay. Unfortunately. Oh, there you are. There you are.
I hit the button to mute and the whole thing went away. Yeah, there's a number of there's a number of cases, as I said, as a kind of a reoccurring nightmare. And one of them, you know, a tool I mentioned earlier. So some content we had actually done in a tool agnostic way using XML. And when that player went away, when the tool went away, we were able to just update all the courses that were created for that tool. We were able to play it in another tool with very minimal amount of updating, and some of it was, you know, things that we had never we had missed earlier. So they were just those kinds of updates. So in order to future-proof your training content, it's imperative to be able to not be not to put in place things that may forever entomb your content in a defunct tool. Now, I'm not comparing, don't get me wrong, I'm not comparing Next-Tech's solutions to some of those other tools.
Totally understand.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that.
Yeah, I guess I would also say that I've encountered where we have different types of subject matter experts that prefer authoring in different ways. So we might want to edit, or we often have to edit for the same player, but using different authoring tools.
Great point. That is a very, very poorly understood benefit of everyone supporting a standard but it is exactly what we have with the web, isn't it? I mean, it's there are so many tools for authoring and a variety of browsers for viewing or playing the same content. So speaking of the web and learning and technology standards, would ARLEM work with WebXR? In other words, can we implement them together in one solution? Fridolin, do you know of anybody doing that?
Yes, we have some students working towards that. It's orthogonal technology, I think is the right word for it. WebXR is a delivery system that is an alternative to some of the games engine worlds that a lot of the AR development takes place in at the moment, like Unreal or Unity. WebXR is on that level, and at the same time, ARLEM is a content model, so it deals with the semantics you need to execute things in the real world of a workplace. It allows you then to bind the delivery of that content to what matters in your workplace, to the elements that you can distinguish, tools, overlaying things on specific tools that you need to describe so you can actually find, detect them, reuse them in different activities and the like. So,
and you could detect them and use them in the browser if you had support for both WebXR and ARLEM in a browser.
Exactly. Wouldn't that be the dream?
It would be. It would simplify a lot of people's lives. Yes. I just want to ask one question about, we've spoken about workforce development, and I'm sure that there are a lot of different qualities of experiences that could be designed and delivered. What makes a high quality AR experience? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I can speak to that briefly from the context that I work in, and once again, kind of specialize in high risk, high compliance environments. But there's something to be said around the ways in which we categorize risk levels that exist within standard operating procedures and activities, as we've spoken about before. And the tagging within the ways of working in an organization that comes into that data aspect, because once you start to get the XAPI data back, you're looking to see if human behavior has changed and what the correlation is back to operational context. And so when we start looking at what types of learning interventions are happening at different times, it's really important to actually understand and kind of codify as an organization the areas for which there is a high degree of risk within a particular step within a procedure, or even just in an operational environment, as well as to kind of codify, the type of work that's being done that's attached to that statement. And I think, that's an important piece that I'm working on a lot, because I think there's a huge piece to be said with regards to making sure that really great high quality experiences get out to people and are accessible, that they interact with those, and that we change behavior, and that we understand the types of behavior that we created against different risk profiles and different types of work within the organization. So I think that's an important layer to think about in the data aspect.
Mm-hmm.
From my side, I think I would throw in durability of content. Content in industrial contexts, but also in educational contexts, is not produced with a timeline of a couple of months in mind. It's often produced with a timeline of several years. And if we look at, for example, aviation and space, several decades in mind. Sometimes people who have been involved in building a part for a space operation aren't even alive when the mission begins. So I think that illustrates quite nicely the conundrum that people are facing when building content that becomes relevant still in the far distant future. You have to protect your investment. You have to make sure that the expensive content, the experience that was needed to create it, that this is all secured and does not go away the moment the medium-sized company goes bust or decides to take their business into a different direction. So I think that is a very important component, as simple as it may sound. Durability of content is quality, or is the enabler of quality.
Okay. Brant and Avron, do you have any inputs or experiences you could share about, deciding what needs to be converted, or maybe how to measure this quality of AR experience?
Well, measuring the return on the value type of thing is often difficult, but there's a number of things that can be done to ensure that I guess a general philosophy would be you need to support the learner and not get in their way, and then in the same way support novices but not get in the way of expertise.
That's very good.
I would echo that, and also add, just from my perspective, from the commercial perspective, is ensuring that the content, that the objectives and the problems or the behavior change that you want to solve is actually solvable using augmented reality, speaking to the quality of an AR experience. And oftentimes we see AR for the sake of AR, which becomes very the shiny coin, or the the wiggling the keys over the baby. But it has no purpose. And echoing the idea of measuring the behavior change after the fact, measuring those objectives after the fact, is very key in determining quality.
And impact and ROI.
Indeed.
Yeah. I'd like to echo that too, because the setting what the goals are and ensuring you met the goals are probably the primary measure of quality.
Nicely said. Sounds voice of experience, Brant.
If we look back at what Jennifer initially said, the skills shift, the changes in society, then I think there is an opportunity, because that's where AR is particularly good in supporting practice, rehearsal, skills. That is a problem that matches AR, and in fact, that is the problem that we try to solve with ARLEM.
Well, that sounds like a pretty graceful place to end. So I'd like to thank everybody for your participation and attention. A great discussion. All my panelists, thank you, attendees. And this recording will also be available from the area YouTube channel in the next day or two. Thank you, everybody. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks.